Welcome back to Return on Character podcast with me, Dan Cooper, the host and portfolio manager of a investment strategy that allocates capital on the basis of the character public company CEOs. Part of this job is that I'm lucky enough to hang out with folks that also think character matters. And today on the show is a good friend of mine, and his name is Tim Sexton. I don't know if any of you have ever seen these documentaries on Netflix or Amazon about the people behind the music industry or the people behind the movies and who is X. Well, there should be a documentary called Who is Tim Sexton? And then tell the story of this man. And I'm just going to briefly kind of give you some highlights. And I will tell you that it's not even scraping the surface of the total. But Tim, Tim is the founder of Make Good, which is a group that, and I'll let him explain exactly what that is. But I mean, for an example, Tim collaborated with American Idol, Simon Fuller, and the British writers, Richard Curtis, to produce the American Idol groundbreaking American Idol Give Back. In 2007, he was decorated with a special Emmy Governor's Award and considered the most successful charity event in the history of television, raising $200 million, setting world records in telephone call-ins. Oh, and Tim also partnered with Bob Geldof, and executive producer for the Live 8, largest music event in the history of the world, which 3 billion people tuned into and 2 million attended. But in 1980, Tim partnered with MTV to create Rock the Vote. You may have heard of that. It was the first American major vote registration effort targeting young voters. Many successful initiatives have been under Tim's litany of history and things that he's done in company and music events and groups that he have performed at his events. I include Paul McCartney, Beyonce, Jay-Z, Bruce Springsteen, U2, Eagles, The Who, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Pink Floyd, Madonna, James Taylor, Coldplay, Kanye West, Will Smith, David Matthews, Green Day, and just to name a few. The other interesting thing that I love that's kind of buried in his biography here is Sexton also served as the personal consultant to the former Soviet Union president, Mikhail Gorbachev. That I think is a story that we all want to hear at some point, and the former governor of Jerry Brown. These are just a few of the interesting facts about Tim Sexton. Tim Sexton, it's a great honor to have you on the show, and thank you so much for showing up. But really, the most important thing about Tim Sexton is that he thinks character matters in the world. And that's why I think we're talking, and that's why I think we're friends. Tim, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dan. I'm so honored to be here with you, and thank you. It's very generous of you to include me.
Oh, it's not at all. It's a gift to us all, and I'm thrilled to talk. And just to get things going, I would love. How did your career start off, Tim? How did you get started in what is the entertainment industry? I think broadly speaking is where you found yourself.
So today, I'm 73. I live in Los Angeles. I'm been happily married for 30 years to an incredible woman, and we got a wonderful 25-year-old son. And so the greatest success in life are those two relationships for me, my son and my wife. I started and many years ago, which we'll get back to, but I operate a company called the Make Good Group. And the Make Good Group's mission basically is to help its clients make good on their promises to their customers, make good in the world, and just make good stuff. Because we work in a world where there's a lot of trash and not a lot of good stuff. What that means is that we help companies figure out how to, and organizations, sometimes nonprofits, sometimes individuals even, we help folks figure out something that is resident in their DNA, that can be surfaced or amplified into walk the talk kind of behaviors, authentic, measurable, verifiable behaviors that then can be modeled in the world. And so we look for, that old Gandhi expression, change, what is the expression? Be the change you want or you want to see in the world. So we look for companies that want to do that, not only because we'd like to see more of them doing that, we want to do that. That's what I want to do, right? My goal in life is to be that. So, so we help folks not do advertising, marketing, touting, how wonderful they are, not talk about the bird sanctuary that they built next to the refinery, but have trusted third-party validators who will talk about them, right? In ways in which, as a consumer, you believe them, that you're hearing it from a trusted, authentic third-party validator.
That's brilliant. I love that. I never picked up on that part of your, so it's real genuine advertising in a way that you bring for these particular companies that is from third party people
but it's
that
not
kind of do it
advertising.
on their own. It's not advertising.
It's never advertising. It's really about using what they're actually doing, helping them message their story. Most often they don't know what their story is. They know that they'd like to be on a path, or because they, either the CEO or the head of the company has high character and wants to be on a path, or they're in need of rehabilitation because of things that have happened to them on a business or personal level, or they're folks who are leaning into ways in which they might improve the state of the world, but have no clue how to get there. So,
can you give us an example of a company that you worked with?
So I'll give you probably, we have several of them, but the one that illustrates the point maybe the best are the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Philadelphia Eagles are an NFL football team. There are, in the world of sports, excuse me, Dan, there's, I don't know, there may be a dozen iconic brands: the New York Yankees, Manchester United, and FC Barcelona, the Lakers, the Green Bay Packers, and the Philadelphia Eagles are in that category. They're one of the oldest teams in the NFL, and they're in the fourth largest media market in America, and the cradle of democracy where America began. And so their ownership decided that they wanted to build a new arena, a new stadium for their football team. They were playing in a broken down, old, legendary stadium called Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. That was just an awful facility, way past its use by date, and didn't work. They finally arranged to get, kind of financing together to build this. And they called me. They called me because I had run a digital technology company that was trying to put music and movies into retail stores so that you could, in those days, buy a CD or a DVD while you waited, as opposed to wandering up and down the aisles. This was, pre-Netflix, it was Blockbuster days, okay?
Right.
Video days. And we had created a pretty cool user interface, sort of little kiosk in a way that sat in the bins in bookstores, video stores, music stores, and game stores, where you could pull a CD up, and scan it, and would give you relational data. It would give you sound samples. It would give you the trailer to the movies. It would tell you if you like Dan Cooper, you might also like Joe Rogan, these kinds of things. And so it was a pretty groundbreaking a little company. And we were, Barnes and Noble was then probably the biggest bookstore retailer in the country, and we were in Barnes, and we were in several of the big box retailers. So the Eagles thought, wow, that kind of kiosk-esque technology, we could put that in our new $1 billion stadium, and we can sort of converge the entertainment experience with the football experience and make it more fun for fans. Um, so that was why I got them. When I met with the owner, I said to him, because I have a background in sports, and that's another thing we had talked. I said, when people go to football games in Philadelphia, I knew something about the market. I had done some more research on it before the meeting. I said, people go to football games in Philadelphia, they really want three things. They want to watch football, they want to order a beer, and they want to be able to get to the men's room. And anything gets in the way of that experience is not going to occur to your benefit. It's not going to be good for you. And if you're going to wire a stadium with all kinds of technology, this is pre-Wi-Fi, you're gonna annoy people as opposed to getting them to be more excited by what you're doing. So he said, "Well, what would you do to do that?" And I said, "Well, in a couple of years, there's going to be this thing called 3G. You're going to have this, and somebody will then pay you to wire your stadium, Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, whoever it is. And they'll pay you. And so you won't need to do all that capital expenditure, to wire your stadium. And you're building your stadium on remedial ground in a Black neighborhood. Your team color is green. Your mascot is on the endangered species. Your customer is about 95% white, but your employees are about 80% Black. You have a disconnect. And when a bunch of them, and when your team moves from fourth place to first place, or first place to fourth place, more likely, what's the little buffer that keeps your fans with you, that keeps people, in your corner, when you're faced with having to amortize this $1 billion stadium investment, and grow the multiple on your business? I said, if you are in a values-based relationship in the market in Philly, and you're connected to people, and they know that somehow, because you're conscious of those factors I just laid out, the racial inequity, environmental problems, et cetera, you're going to have a different relationship. And you're going to have a little bit of an emotional and psychological buffer when the bad times hit. It may only last a minute, but it'll give you enough time to recover, to sort of put your business on the right footing. So let's create a program that leverages what you're talking about with this stadium, and let's call it Go Green, because that's your color. It can be double entendre, cheer for the team, and a messaging platform. And let's build your stadium off the grid. Well, what does that mean? I said, well, you can build your stadium without tying it into the electrical grid. It can be a freestanding, independent energy source that you can in turn use to sell energy into the local marketplace. But most importantly, you're not leaving an environmental footprint from the energy that you use. He thought that was great. How do we do that? We set about trying to create that program. We had a lot of pushback from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the city of Philadelphia, and the insurance companies who were backing the project. So we didn't get the stadium built off the grid, but we did do everything short of building it off the grid by creating this very, very comprehensive environmental program. And the program, again, we didn't advertise it. We didn't say, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z. We just quietly started to change operations as the stadium was built. And the program, I'll just fast forward, the program, they remain my clients 25 years later, right? And because part of what we said to them was sustainability
Right.
is a journey, not a destination. People want to talk about, oh, we're sustainable. Well, it doesn't work that way. Everything in life that is sustainable, forget green sustainability, just sustainable, period, is a long-term endeavor. So the net of it all is that now, many years later, the stadium is off the grid. We were able to bring in a big energy company that installed solar and wind. The stadium generates more energy every day than we use on a football day. So there's, in fact, 6 times the energy is generated per that is used
Wow.
at one football. They become the biggest seller of renewable energy into the Pennsylvania grid. There is only one item in their entire supply chain that is not recyclable or compostable. So there is zero waste operation. And the energy use, I mean, we've gone to the extent of taking the cooking fat out of their kitchens and converting it to biofuels that then operate all their maintenance vehicles and their limousine, their buses and all these other things. So quietly that program over time became a model for media and entertainment, so much so that at a certain point, one of our presidents picked up the phone with Barack Obama during his second term, and he called the owner of the Eagles, and he said, everybody talks about the new green economy and, what that means. He said, I just read about you guys, and you are the living embodiment. So that's an example of taking something that was resonant in the DNA of an organization. It's a long-winded story, Dan, sorry. It took something that was resonant in their DNA, their colors, their team mascot, and their customer relationships, and turning it into a measurable, verifiable program that people can point to and say, oh, that does X, Y, and Z. And by the way, the return on investment on it is substantially more than they would have gotten had they done otherwise. As an example, we got a company one of the big energy companies, Reliant, pay NRG as the company to pay to wire that stadium with solar. We educational big pavilions where you can park your vehicle under it in the parking lot, plug your Winnebago or your car, whatever you're doing for a game day tailgate party. Those pavilions are adorned with big messaging boards that are 15 feet tall and 10 feet wide that tell the story of soil conservation or reforestation or composting. And so there's a lesson plan in the middle of a football environment. And the monies that they get paid by that energy company is in the high 9 figures.
I have to ask, in relation to that story, you mentioned the inequities between, the black and white communities, and did the Philadelphia Eagles address any of that as a consequence of this new project, and how did that
Yeah,
bridge
100%.
happen?
The owners of the Eagles, Jeffrey Lurie, um, and his family. They are, they're, I may be wrong about this, but I believe they are the single biggest contributor to autism research in the country. So there's a generosity that, and a commitment to other things that's resident in them. Jeffrey Lurie himself is a fabulous, great guy who, if you want to talk about return on character, he's a wonderful example of it. And Jeffrey, went to Brandeis and got a PhD in women's studies. So what NFL owner or big sports owner anywhere has a PhD in women's studies? No way,
Name one.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
Jeffrey did that because, he came of age in the 60s and he came of age, in a time when there was a lot of inequities for women. His mother is a strong, wonderful person. She was a great role model for him. Um, and so Jeffrey got some values baked in early that he's just carried through. So, when Michael Vick, the famous football player, got into trouble because he was running a dogfighting operation and he was about to be drummed out of the NFL. It was a great, fantastic quarterback. Jeffrey signed it. And Jeffrey said, well, let's not castigate this guy. Let's not ostracize him. Let's see if we can make his life better. And he turned that guy around. And so the Eagles philanthropies, the Eagle Foundation, the ways in which they do things are always mindful of these communities that we all are a part of that don't have as much as others. And it's also just good business. I mean, gotta, if your employees are primarily African American, you ought to be giving back to those communities. If only to be selfish about replenishing those waters. So they have a wonderful vision program where they run a van around Philadelphia, provide free eye exams, because one of the things that impacts low scores in schools is kids don't have glasses, can't see the whiteboard or the blackboard or read things properly. So the Eagles bus drives around Philadelphia providing free eye examinations to kids in underserved communities and giving them free glasses and help them figure out through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the federal government that, oh, by the way, that stuff is covered under Medicare anyway. And so all of these families in those Black communities didn't know they could take advantage of that. They do now because of the Eagles. So there's 20 other examples of that, but that's the kind of stuff that they do.
Seems like there needs to be a book written about this subject, but I think there's a lot of subjects that you've been involved in that is worthy of a book. But Make Good as a group or an organization basically comes in with other organizations and does things like this. And it sounds like it's not just one consulting trip. It's you really get in the weeds.
Yeah,
and
that's
you,
right.
And you work with the said company to implement.
Well, consumers are smart, Dan, and they, we can smell, when there isn't real behavior. We can, we're all now with social media and technology, the world is so transparent that it's very easy to see if you pay even the tiniest bit of attention to people who are telling the truth and what they're doing is verifiable. So our view is that sort of like Will Rogers, the great old American humorist from the 30s, was, one time the biggest star in the world, cowboy star, vaudeville star. He said, if you let other people toot your horn, the sound goes twice as far. So we sort of taken that on as a part of how we operate. And so once Eagles, as that example, or others are doing that kind of work, then we look for these third-party validators who are trusted and admired, um, to talk about them, which then generates earned media, which then you can amplify, and touch people in ways that and add uh, any kind of advertising turns people off. This you feel like you discovered it.
In looking back it seems like you're an idea guy. Like the litany of things that you've been involved in. It was like they're Tim Sexton seeds that you've planted, and they've grown into trees, orchards, or whatever it ends up being. Is there one or two that really stand out to you that you feel the luckiest to have had a chance to be a part of, and maybe the proudest
I think all of it, to be
early?
honest. I think that I've been really, really blessed to be in some interesting rooms with interesting people. And um, uh, how I got to some of those places is, we could talk about, but um, when good things happen, when you move the needle and you help make change and you benefit the least amongst us or the planet going forward, our kids and their kids, when those things happen, it's never about an individual. It's never about me, certainly. It's about, that'll, it's about a village, everybody has lines in that play and everybody contributes. And so maybe what I've been able to offer is is the use of popular culture in a way to help um, sort of give loft or give a profile or lubricate the message so that it slides through and gets heard easier. These, social change movements that we've witnessed over, the last 75 years or so in America and around the world, almost all of them, um, are as a consequence of a whole bunch of tumblers lining up in the universe that somehow magically get unlocked by the circumstances that the world finds itself. It's not that Bob Geldof, who came up with the idea of living, or Mikhail Gorbachev, who broke down the Soviet Union. That those guys had some special vision that was smarter than Dan Cooper's or Tim Sexton's. He saw that there were shifts going on and these tumblers lined up in a way. They got to get their message through because the world was ready. So for me, I think I've I've been really lucky to be part of a bunch of that had changed my life and hopefully changed the lives of others. Mostly changed my life. Uh, it was not me. It was, I was just there and I knew how to do something that somebody else didn't know how to do in that chain. Um,
Well, Tim, give us an example, just to set the example of one of those moments you found yourself in an interesting spot, so that we understand kind of what you mean by you found yourself in some interesting moments in the history of the world.
Okay. Well, there's a couple I can point to, I guess. You mentioned Rock the Vote earlier. So I'll tell you a little bit about. So, gives a little bit of a context. Post Nixon and Watergate, America was looking for ways to sort of make um, the electoral process more responsive. Okay. And we had millions of young people across the country who were protesting the war, were protesting civil rights. And Watergate happened, was a big scandal. And the Nixon was drummed out of office. And federal government, in one of their many responses to that period of time, decided that we could do something about campaign finance. Then this is in the early 70s, and we could give taxpayers the opportunity to check a box on their tax return and donate $1 that would go into a fund to help pay for campaigns. And if you, Dan Cooper, were running for office in a state, if you got 20,000 signatures in that state and got on the ballot, and then you got 20 states of the 50 U.S. states, you then qualified for that pool of matching funds money. Okay? So fade out, fade in. Jimmy Carter, governor of Georgia. His son goes to the University of Georgia in Athens. His son is friends with the kids on the entertainment committee at the University of Georgia who are booking concerts for homecoming and those kinds of things, right? And one of Jimmy's kids was friends with a guy named Hamilton Jordan, who was the entertainment director at the University of Georgia. He was a senior, at Georgia. And Chip thought, maybe my friend can help one of these guys do a benefit concert, not knowing anything about that federal election campaign stuff, right? And checking all the boxes. Okay. Well, he does. And the Allman Brothers do a concert for Jimmy Carter in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And that, because Carter had qualified, the money made on the back of that sold out concert then got matched by the Fed. And Jimmy Carter was able to buy TV time next 5 states. And he ran the next 5 states and effectively eliminated anybody else's opportunity to get the Democratic nomination. He became president of the United States. Okay? The back of a UGA concert, right? In Hershey, Pennsylvania. So during that same period of time, here in California, where I live, there were a bunch of musicians who were friends of mine who, like me, grew up surfing and taking advantage of the California coast. And nuclear power plants were being built on the coast of California. And a bunch of people didn't like that. And there was pushback against that. And so these musicians, people like Jackson Browne and Crosby, Stills and Nash and others, Bonnie Raitt, et cetera, they started to do these little benefits to help these grassroots environmental organizations in California push back. And it was a fledgling little group of organizations. There were probably 10 of them in the state, maybe not even that many. And they had small constituencies. But these musicians, wanted to do something about it. And I got asked by a couple of them to help them organize concerts to help them raise money. So that's happening while when I talk about tumblers in the universe, over here, 5 years earlier, Jimmy Carter gets elected on the back of the Allman Brothers. 5 years later, I'm kind of a guy who is trying to do something about the stuff that I care about with my friend. And we organize a bunch of benefit concerts, one of which turns out to become, at the end of the 70s, the biggest music event of the 70s. Woodstock was the moment of the 60s. The 2 big moments in the 70s musically were George Harrison's concerts for Bangladesh, which happened 71 or 72 in Madison Square Garden, a couple of nights in Madison Square Garden, and something called No Nukes, which was an organization called Musicians United for Safe Energy, Muse. And it were James Taylor and Jackson Brown and Graham Nash and Bonnie Raitt, John Hall, who went on to become a congressman. And they decided that they wanted to do something more than these little anti-nuclear benefit things. And so I got called and asked to be involved because it was Madison Square Garden. And very few people knew how to manage Madison Square Garden. I did. How I did, I'll tell you that separately. So I produced this event. It was 5 nights in Madison Square Garden. It was an outdoor event for about 300,000 people, all the same week. It was the cover of, national newspapers and magazines for, Rolling Stone, which was then the Bible, probably did 3 cover stories on it, including one on me. It became this giant event. So fade out, fade in. We got Jimmy Carter 10 years earlier now, 9 years earlier. We got me doing these little things. And Ronald Reagan is now president. It's the 80s. And early 80s. And I get a call from a friend of mine who says, who's related to Ted Kennedy, or somebody I knew, and said, "Hey, Uncle Teddy's going to run for president. And he wants to call you to do concerts like Jimmy Carter had 10 years ago to raise money for him to become president." Well, I'm not really much of a candidate guy, Dan. I'm really more of an issues person. And I think, electoral politics is a little bit like the Grand Prix or the Oscars. It's a big spectacle, but people doing the work around issues in their communities is what matters most. So I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to say no to Ted Kennedy? I don't want to do this. And moment of panic, I realized, oh, you registered voters generally become Democrats. It accrues to the Democratic side of the ledger. And there's money out there for voter registration that Democratic Party spends. I can focus on voter registration. And then when Ted Kennedy calls, I can say, oh, love to help, but I gave it the office. I'm doing voter registration work. Sorry. And so to pull that off, I had to figure out how to tap into that voter registration fund that the parties spend. And MTV was then a nascent entity, was trying to spin off to go public, had a lot of issues with guns and violence and sexism and music videos, which was causing real friction for them in the public markets as they were trying to take their TV public. And Bob Pittman, who's was then the head of MTV, now the head of iHeartRadio, I knew a little bit, and I knew somebody else who knew him better than I knew. And I thought, what if I could get a bunch of rock stars who I knew to do public service spots encouraging people to register to vote? And what if we put those public service spots on MTV? I could hand out hearts, say to Senator Kennedy, sorry, I'm doing this other work. And maybe we also might enfranchise young voters who were then locked out of the process. So we came up with a title for this called Feel the Power. MTV, Bob Pittman gave us $1 million to mount the campaign. Another guy and I did it. Guy who's passed away named Larry Johnson, a wonderful friend of mine, a great guy. We produced 20 odd spots that became Rock the Vote, where we rebranded it a year later. And I remained on that board for, I don't know, a decade. But that's...
Which also helped MTV, by the way, improve its image, right?
Absolutely. Helped MTV improve its image dramatically. And it gave, their board and all those executives there not only, kind of way to be citizen leaders, um, in ways that they probably wanted to be, but again, it was in that DNA. It's resident in people. They just don't know how to get there sometimes. It gave them the opportunity and a platform to do that. And then MTV, all those group of young executives there, they never forgot that lesson. Um, and, John Sykes, who worked there, went on to create Save the Music at H1. And, Tom Freston went on to do similar work at Viacom. And, so, people got infected.
Did the Rock the Vote have an impact on
Yeah,
voting
it
with
had a
kids?
big impact. I mean, it was the biggest impact people can look up was when when Bill Clinton got elected.
Hmm.
Because one of the things that the guy who kind of came after me or came right behind me in Rock the Vote is the genius who rebranded it from Field of Power, which is a guy named Jeff Aroff, who was a marketing guy at Warner's and a wonderful guy who smart as hell. And Jeff rebranded Field of Power as Rock the Vote. Um, and I worked, uh, a bunch of years with that organization. Uh, Knock-on effect of it is that Rock the Vote focused on something called the Motor Voter Bill, which would allow you to register to vote when you went in to renew your driver's license. Because voter laws, and this is another conversation, but the short version is voter laws in America were and remain were written by wealthy and empowered white people who didn't want people of color to be participating and deciding things. Goes all the way back to the Electoral College and um, the slave owner colonialists, our founding fathers, who didn't think black people were smart enough to make their own decisions, so they created the Electoral College. So that goes forward to today, where we do whatever we can to keep people out of the process so they can't vote. So in many states in those days, you had to drive if you were to the county seat on a Wednesday afternoon between 1:30 and 3:30 in order to register to vote. Well, if you're a black woman with 3 kids and a housekeeper, and your husband's got a job, and how do you drive 60 miles to the county seat or wherever it was to register to vote? All that stuff was by design
Hmm.
to keep people from participating. So the motor voter bill basically said, when you register to vote, when you get your driver's license renewed, you can register to vote. That got passed as a piece of federal legislation as a consequence of Rock the Vote. So that's
Well,
one of the effects.
no one, I think, thinks, oh, well, the music industry, in fact, it infected the way we vote, or not infected, I'm sorry, affected, or can affect, or can incite change from a policy standpoint. I think historically we kind of remember Woodstock and the great days of the early rock and roll and purpose and love and peace. Um, where's it today? I'd be interested to your perspective. It's like, I feel like we need the music industry more than ever to come and rise up and provide some guidance and inspiration to doing the right thing in the world. Do you have an opinion about, like, always, is there any examples of that happening today? Why don't we have another Bob Geldof doing another uh, big event?
Like Live Aid.
Yeah, or something along those lines today. Where is it
Well,
going?
I don't have a simple answer to that. I think that um, uh, the world has changed a lot in terms of the impact of social media and technology has changed things. Um, and certainly the last you know, 6 or 10 years of American politics and um, major media companies and the feeding frenzy around politics, news, and all that stuff has made it harder to get across. Um, there's also sort of simple math in that, in the heyday of the music business, when the music business was selling tonnage, millions of records, tons and tons, physically tons of records, CDs, so forth. That was in the 90s and the era of the kind of the boy bands. We want to think it's 60s and those things. That's when the biggest impact was in terms of revenues. Uh, and we were putting out about, as an industry, I think the music industry was releasing between singles, box sets, and albums, about 40,000 records a year, 45,000 records a year, something like that. I'm going to get this number wrong, but somebody can fact check us. That today, there are something on the order of 60,000 records a day released versus 40,000 a year. So, um, so, how do you get through that noise? Um, and then news cycle and people wanting things fast and social media and Twitter and this instant kind of response. Um, it becomes harder to galvanize people around a particular idea. Becomes harder to. It's easy to be anti something. It's not always easy to be for something. If you galvanize people around a single idea, the short attention span mentality of our culture makes it harder to to execute things that take that require people to put their shoulder to the wheel to make it happen. So there's that, right? And then there's the fact that in the 60s there was a set of social and cultural conditions that came together that produced in my generation, coming out of World War II, a decade of abundance, to looking around the end of the 50s and 60s, and you a new president, Kennedy, who represents youth and vitality. And you look around and you also see, gee, we got a chicken in every pot, 2 cars in our garage, and look at Smiths, they got the same, et cetera, et cetera. Yet there were millions of people who didn't. And so young people of my generation looked at all that and thought they called bullshit, basically. You couple that, 1968, we assassinated Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and John Lennon came later. And and the year before that, Malcolm X was killed, and Kent State happened. All these things were happening kind of at the same time, and young people said, and the biggest was Vietnam. The the Tet Offensive in 1968 in Vietnam was this miscalculation by Lyndon Johnson, who was our president, and by the U.S. military. And they promoted a big buildup, and we're going to eliminate the Vietcong and the Vietnamese, and we're going to win that war. And in truth, there were higher casualties on both sides than had ever been seen before. It didn't do anything to dissuade the Vietnamese. What it did was it made Americans see every day on television a body count. And so they pushed back. This is a lot of the things lined up in the 60s and became this. I think it was a kind of a dark period in many ways. That in that couple of year period from 1967 to 1969, when Woodstock happened, people were looking for light.
if there was any individual in your career that was your mentor, from a character perspective, you just admire the heck out of, or stories that were testimonies to kind of your motivation to be the way you are today, too.
Boy, there's a lot, a lot who had an impact on me. Kennedy had an impact on me. My dad had an impact on me. Um, um, uh, Pope Paul or Pope John the 23rd had an impact
Mhm.
on me. The Berrigan brothers had an impact on Mark Malcolm X, and then you know Graham Nash wrote a song about Chicago, and the call and refrain was, we can change the world if we believe in certain principles. I was trying to get people to come to Chicago to protest Chicago 7, then Chicago 8. And that song touched me. Ohio, that song touched me. So there were Jackson Brown's music touched me. Bruce Springsteen, all these people I somehow got to rub up against one way or another. And that's you know, a lucky thing in my life is how people I've gotten to be in the rooms with. And those things all rubbed off on me and hit. And I know I decided at a certain point that um, I knew how to operate the levers of popular culture.
Mhm.
I knew how to operate branding and marketing tools through work experiences that I had. I knew how to produce things. I knew how to put things together. I had enough responsibility baked into my DNA by my parents that church and school um, that um, I at a certain point decided, well, I know how to do a bunch of these things. Can I put those things to work to for better outcomes for, as the great Will of the Iroquois said, the seventh generation of follow us. Um, and and that became my mission, and that's how I started making. Was okay. I know how to do all that. Here's what I need.
And you're also, I hear you're working on a documentary. Is that true?
Yeah, producing. We talked a minute ago about Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I'm producing a documentary on them because their music and their who they are sort of speaks to that theme that we didn't really dig into very far, but about what existed and what existed then, and the similarities and the differences,
Right.
and the arc of America, and the role of musicians as pipe pipers in that uh, is, I think, is part of what we'll look at in this documentary.
I
In
think we
addition
need
to
it
their
more than
music.
ever. I think we need the music industry to write songs like it once did, and have artists that really passionately care about specific issues, um, and help guide. I think it makes a difference in the world. Music is
I
a
think they
powerful thing.
are. I just think that it's harder because of the volume we were talking about earlier, number of records. I think it's just
Yeah,
harder to get that. I think artists are still doing it, or a lot of them. I don't think they are. I know a lot of them are still doing it, and a lot of them
yeah,
care. And again, those tumblers are shifting. America is a much different place now than it was 5 or 6 years ago, and it's going to be a much different place in the next 10 years than it is today. Popular culture will always have an important role.
Okay, last question. What advice would you give today to a young Tim Sexton just starting out his career?
For me, um, it's important to be present, people that you're with. Um, and so what that means to me is to um, listen more, um, and to um, acknowledge that uh, there's other points of view uh, that you can learn from, uh, And I think as young people, and even as an old guy now, 73, we're all salespeople in our own way, right? We're all out there sort of selling whatever it is we're doing, and we're seeking agreement for our condition or our idea or whatever it is. And I think it's more important to live. And uh, uh, so I think that if I was doing things over again, I'd listen.
Well, thank you, Tim Sexton, for being on the show. You're a gift, and I'm proud to count you as a friend, and I'm thrilled to be able to share a little bit of you today with some of the other
Oh, we're good
folks
for
out
you,
there.
man.
Yeah, I'd love to. All right.
I'm a fan of yours, Dan, and I just think what you're trying to do is so important and so uh, valuable in the long term in terms of changing the DNA of how business operates.
Mhm.
And so I honestly, without too much of a waxing Dan Cooper's car moment, what you're building and trying to build is incredible. So the more people that know about it, more opportunity you're going to have to succeed. So any way I can help,
Thank you, Tim.
here to do so, buddy.